When people think of Paul McCartney, they imagine the sweet-faced Beatle, the golden voice behind Hey Jude, the cheerful guy who seemed to carry sunshine wherever he went. But behind that bright smile was a man a lot more layered, emotional, private, and quietly scarred by betrayal. For years, fans thought the Beatles' biggest fights were all about fame, songs, or money, but there was something deeper brewing, something far more personal. Paul carried a secret bitterness toward one person who, in his eyes, broke something sacred, a wound that never really healed. In this story, we're digging into that hidden feud, the name that Paul kept off his list of friends forever, the betrayal that shook the Beatles from the inside, and the silent anger that shadowed him long after the final encore. Let's start with number 1, John Lennon. Paul McCartney and John Lennon were once inseparable, writing over 200 songs together and shaping the very sound of the 60s. But by the mid-1960s, the cracks started to show. John couldn't stand Paul's squeaky clean image anymore, while Paul grew fed up with John's chaos and the non-stop drama surrounding Yoko Ono. Then came the death of their manager, Brian Epstein, and everything fell apart. Paul tried desperately to hold the band together, but John was done. He wanted out. Inside the studio, Paul's perfectionist energy clashed hard with John's rebellious streak, and even George Harrison had enough. He walked out for a while. When the Beatles finally called it quits, Paul took the legal route and sued to dissolve their company. To John, that move wasn't business, it was betrayal. Lennon fired back hard with his venom-filled track, How Do You Sleep, sneering at Paul with the brutal line, "The only thing you done was yesterday." It hit deep. Paul didn't stay silent, though. He answered with too many people, slipping in sly digs aimed at John and Yoko. But before there was any chance to patch things up, tragedy struck, ending everything in an instant. On December 8, 1980, John Lennon was shot and killed in New York City, leaving Paul with something no friendship can survive: words that came too late. Not number 2, Michael Jackson. In the early 80s, Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson were actually tight, two global icons from different worlds who vibed like brothers. Paul treated Michael like the little brother he never had, while Michael looked up to Paul as one of music's living legends. One day, during a casual talk, Paul dropped what he thought was a simple piece of advice. The real key to long-term success is owning song copyrights. He explained how buying up catalogs could secure financial freedom for life. But what Paul meant as friendly wisdom, Michael took as a challenge and an opportunity. By 1985, when ATV Music, the company owning most of the Beatles' songs, went up for sale, Michael swooped in and bought it for a jaw-dropping $47.5 million. To Paul, it felt like a gut punch, a betrayal straight from someone he trusted. The student had flipped the script on the teacher. Their friendship never bounced back. Even years later, when Michael's money troubles hit hard, he never sold those rights back. Instead, he joined forces with Sony and kept control. Paul admitted later that the sting never really went away. He quietly confessed, "I thought we were friends, but Michael turned it into a business deal. It hurt deeply." And then number 3, Mark David Chapman. That freezing night in December 1980 still haunts music history. John Lennon was heading home to the Dakota Building when Mark David Chapman, a 25-year-old fan turned obsessed stalker, shot him 4 times, killing him instantly. Just hours earlier, Lennon had signed an autograph for the same man. When the shocking news reached Paul McCartney, he was speechless. Surrounded by reporters outside a studio, all he managed to say was, "It's a drag." Those 3 small words would follow him for decades, seen by many as heartless, but in truth, they came from sheer disbelief and heartbreak. Paul was shattered. He later confessed, Mark Chapman didn't just kill John, he stole a piece of the Beatles' soul. For years, McCartney refused to even say the man's name, calling him nothing more than a coward and a damned psycho. Every Beatles tribute, every fan celebration carried a sting, a painful reminder that the Fab Four would never stand together again. What tore Paul apart the most was knowing that just weeks before John's death, they had finally started talking again, laughing, reconnecting, and even tossing around the idea of a reunion. But on December 8, 1980, that fragile hope vanished forever. Paul carried that heartbreak for life, but while Chapman pulled the trigger, there was another name behind the Beatles' slow collapse, someone Paul has never truly forgiven. Number 4. George Harrison. Inside the studio, Paul and George's tension ran deep. Paul's drive for perfection pushed everyone to their breaking point, especially George, who grew sick of being told exactly how to play his guitar. During the Let It Be sessions, it all exploded. Paul kept giving direction after direction until George finally snapped, calmly set down his guitar and said, "See you around the clubs." Then he walked right out. It wasn't the first time George's creative ideas were brushed aside or rewritten, and to him, that was pure humiliation. Sure, they stayed polite in public, smiling for the cameras, but underneath, resentment burned quietly. George once said flat out, working with Paul is like having your hands tied up. Even after the Beatles' breakup, the drama didn't end. Legal battles over Apple Corp kept the tension alive. Paul wanted structure and control, while George fought for his independence. In the end, Paul's relentless ambition, his need to keep everything perfect, turned one of his most loyal bandmates into a silent rebel. But the next major hit to the Beatles' brotherhood wasn't just from inside the studio, it came from far beyond it. Number 5. Yoko Ono. Before 1968, the Beatles' studio was a sacred space, a kind of creative temple where only the music mattered. But everything flipped upside down once John Lennon started bringing Yoko Ono into every session. Her constant presence completely shifted the band's delicate balance. Yoko was bold, outspoken, and fiercely protective of John, never afraid to voice her thoughts even in the middle of a take. That fiery attitude didn't sit well with Paul McCartney. As a perfectionist who thrived on structure and focus, he saw Yoko's sudden involvement as an unwanted distraction.
She'd give feedback during songwriting or recording, and to Paul, that felt like stepping into sacred territory. He once admitted, "I don't resent Yoko for being with John, but I hate the way things changed once she appeared." Many music historians point to that very moment as the beginning of the slow unraveling of the Lennon-McCartney partnership. When the Beatles finally fell apart, Paul never outright blamed Yoko, but he often hinted in interviews that she played a huge role in the band's downfall. He said John was never quite the same after meeting her, that every choice, whether creative or personal, seemed to run through Yoko. But Yoko didn't back down from her side of the story. She saw her connection with John not just as love, but as a groundbreaking artistic partnership, a creative revolution that aimed to rewrite culture itself. She once declared John was the real creative soul, and pointedly added that Paul was just good at crafting catchy melodies. That line cut deep. To Paul, it felt like a slap in the face, an insult to the years he'd spent proving he was every bit John's equal. After John's tragic death, the bitterness between them only grew heavier. The famous Lennon-McCartney songwriting credit had always symbolized unity, no matter who actually wrote the song. But Paul wanted to set the record straight, changing the credit on songs like Yesterday to McCartney-Lennon. Yoko flat out refused, accusing him of trying to shrink John's legacy. What started as an artistic disagreement turned into a cold war of pride, grief, and legacy, one that left a scar on music history forever. She wants to rewrite history to benefit her and John, Paul once snapped, his voice filled with frustration. But I can't let that happen. Yoko didn't stay quiet either. She shot back hard, brushing off Paul's solo career as simplistic and empty entertainment. Then came the real sting. In a 1981 Rolling Stone poll, Yoko even labeled Paul the least important Beatle. That insult cut deep, leaving a bruise that didn't fade for years. By the late 1990s, though, time had started to cool the fire. When Paul worked on the Beatles anthology and helped re-release the band's old recordings, he and Yoko found a fragile peace. They exchanged polite letters, kept things civil, and avoided direct conflict. But the trust? It was gone for good. Years later, Paul reflected quietly, "I don't hate Yoko, but if it weren't for her, the Beatles might have lasted a few more years." But even after all that chaos, another storm was waiting, and this time it didn't come from Yoko. It came from inside the Beatles' world itself. This was the moment when someone Paul thought of as a loyal partner turned into the source of one of his deepest betrayals. Number 7. Alan Klein. After the sudden death of their manager Brian Epstein in 1967, the Beatles were spinning out of control. They were music legends, but when it came to running their business empire, they were completely lost. Apple Films, Apple Corps, their studio, even their boutique, all of it was bleeding money fast. That's when Alan Klein walked into the picture, presenting himself as the band's financial savior. Klein was slick, confident, and sharp, a tough businessman who had managed the Rolling Stones and Sam Cooke. He had a reputation for fighting record labels and claiming he could protect artists from getting ripped off. He told the Beatles he'd make them richer than ever before. But Paul wasn't buying it. From day one, he saw through Klein's charm. He thought the guy was too smooth, too calculating, and completely untrustworthy. He pushed for another option instead, Eastman & Eastman, the law firm run by his wife Linda's family. But John, George, and Ringo didn't agree. They were drawn to Klein's bold promises and no-nonsense attitude. John, in particular, admired his blunt style and didn't hide it. By 1969, the divide was complete. John, George, and Ringo all signed with Klein, while Paul refused. And from that moment on, the unity of the Beatles shattered even further. The battle lines were officially drawn. After Paul refused to sign with Alan Klein, he was completely cut out of major decisions. Klein took over fast, firing longtime employees, axing projects, and tightening budgets. For a short while, it looked like his ruthless methods worked. Profits actually went up. But Paul wasn't fooled for a second. He was sure Klein was pocketing money that didn't belong to him. By the end of 1970, McCartney had reached his breaking point. He sued the other Beatles, not just to end the band, but to free himself from Klein's grip. The world painted Paul the villain, the traitor who destroyed the Beatles. But history flipped that story. Years later, it came out that Klein had been caught in financial fraud, forced to pay back over $800,000 to the group. Even Lennon, Harrison, and Starr eventually admitted Paul had been right all along. But by then, it was too late. The Beatles were gone forever. McCartney later called Alan Klein the man who killed the Beatles, not with music, but with money. Now, number 7, Frank Sinatra. At first, there was zero bad blood between Paul McCartney and Old Blue Eyes himself. Paul admired Sinatra's golden voice, his charisma, and that smooth sophistication that defined a whole generation. For a while, there was genuine mutual respect, two icons from two completely different worlds showing love for each other's craft. But that peace didn't last. Sinatra started throwing shade at rock and roll, calling it a garbage pile for rebellious kids. Ouch! For Paul, one of the artists who helped create that so-called garbage, it felt like a direct punch to the gut. It wasn't just an insult to rock, it was a shot at everything the Beatles stood for: youth, freedom, rebellion, and change. Things got worse when Sinatra mocked Yesterday, calling it the saddest song ever written. He even parodied it during a live show, turning Paul's heartfelt ballad into a joke. That one hit hard. Just as Paul began to move past it, Sinatra struck again. During another concert, he performed George Harrison's Something, but introduced it to the crowd as the greatest love song Lennon and McCartney ever wrote. It might have sounded like praise to most people, but to Paul it felt like another insult, completely erasing George's credit and treating the Beatles as one faceless act instead of four unique artists. From that moment on, Paul knew Sinatra would never truly see them as equals. To him, the Beatles were just noisy upstarts who had crashed his world of polished ballads and timeless tuxedos. They never traded harsh words face to face, but the quiet tension between Paul McCartney and Frank Sinatra never faded. It wasn't just a clash of artists, it was a collision of eras. Sinatra's old-school class versus McCartney's wild, youthful rebellion. The feud left behind a subtle scar, one that never truly healed.
Now, number 8, Phil Spector. By 1970, the Beatles were already falling apart from the inside.
Paul's Get Back project was supposed to bring them back to their raw, live roots, 4 guys in a studio making real music again, but instead it turned into a battlefield of arguments, frustration, and burnout. When new manager Alan Klein, whom Paul already distrusted, hired producer Phil Spector to fix the recordings, that was it, the final straw. Spector was famous for his wall of sound, huge orchestras, booming choirs, and layers of echo that drowned everything in drama. But that was not what Paul wanted. His song The Long and Winding Road was supposed to be fragile, intimate, a personal confession, not a Hollywood explosion. Instead, Spector buried Paul's simple piano and voice under an avalanche of strings, brass, and even a women's choir. To make things worse, he erased some of Paul's original vocals to squeeze in his own edits. When Paul heard the final version, he was furious. He fired off a letter to Klein and Spector demanding they get the strings, the brass, the choir, and all that noisy stuff off. It was his way of saying, "You violated my song." But his protests were ignored. In May 1970, Let It Be hit the shelves with Spector's heavy-handed mix intact. The world loved it. The album was a massive hit, but for Paul, it felt like a personal defeat. He saw it as proof that the Beatles were no longer one band. They were 4 men drifting in different directions. Even producer George Martin, the so-called 5th Beatle, was outraged, saying bitterly, "This album should read, produced by George Martin and ruined by Phil Spector." Spector, as usual, brushed it off. He bragged, "Paul's been performing my version for decades. He even won an Oscar for Let It Be. If he wants a fight, he's picked the wrong man." But Paul didn't forget, not for a second. Over 30 years later, in 2003, he finally took back his song. He released Let It Be Naked, a stripped-down, pure version of the album, just piano, voice, and silence. No orchestra, no choir, no noise. Just the heart of the song as Paul had meant it from the start. It wasn't just a remix, it was a reckoning, a quiet message to the world. This music is mine, and no one will ever distort it again. Why Paul McCartney never revealed his list? Why has Paul McCartney never spoken publicly about the people he couldn't stand? The answer isn't fear, it's wisdom. Paul knows the power of perception. To millions, he's the friendly Beatle, the face of peace, optimism, and love. If he ever spoke openly about grudges, that image would collapse overnight. Instead of the beloved legend, people would see a bitter man stuck in the past. And in Britain, open resentment is seen as undignified, something McCartney deeply understands. He knows one angry quote could explode across the world in headlines like, "McCartney reignites Beatles feud," so he stays quiet, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. The Beatles aren't just a band, they're a symbol of unity, of hope, of what music can do when people come together. Paul knows that if he ever attacked Lennon, Yoko, or George, that magic would shatter instantly. Instead, he lets the music do the talking. His song, Too Many People, was a sly jab at John, and Lennon's How Do You Sleep was the reply. Their feud wasn't fought with insults. It played out through melodies, riffs, and lyrics that told the world everything without saying a word. Many of Paul's so-called rivals were tied to people he truly loved. Yoko was John's wife, and John, despite all the pain, was still his brother. To attack her publicly would have reopened wounds for millions. And Paul knows how harsh history can be. If he ever said, "I hate Sinatra," or "I despise Spector," that one quote could erase everything else, the peace, the love, the let it be that defined him. Now in his 80s, McCartney chooses grace over grudges. He steps on stage with that same boyish grin, still singing about love, hope, and second chances. For him, silence isn't weakness. It's the highest form of forgiveness. In the end, maybe the only list Paul keeps isn't a list of enemies, but a list of lessons learned. And that's why, after all the feuds, betrayals, and heartbreaks, he still stands tall, still shines bright, and still reminds the world of one timeless truth: love outlasts everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Paul McCartney's hidden feuds and untold stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which feud shocked you the most. Let's keep the conversation alive.